Hi, friend. I'm Melissa, and welcome back to Midlife with Melissa. Wherever you're listening today, I am so glad you're here. I have been saving you a seat, so grab your favorite drink, get comfortable, and let's spend a little time together. Last week, we talked about something I wish someone had warned me about years ago: the emotional and mental side of perimenopause. We talked about brain fog, exhaustion, anxiety, isolation, and what it feels like when you no longer recognize the way you're thinking, feeling, or moving through the world. For me, finally understanding that perimenopause could be affecting so many parts of my life brought me a sense of relief. It did not make everything better overnight. It did not immediately bring back the woman I remembered being. But once I understood what was happening, something inside me changed. I immediately had the will to figure out how to get back to me. For such a long time, I had been asking, what is wrong with me? But now I was beginning to ask, what is happening to me? And what can I do to help myself through this? That was an important shift because understanding gave me something I had not felt in a long time: hope. And once I began to feel that hope again, another question started rising to the surface. How do you begin trusting yourself again? How do you rebuild confidence after spending months or even years questioning your thoughts, your decisions, your emotions, and sometimes your entire identity? I wish I could tell you that my confidence returned all at once. That one morning I woke up, I looked in the mirror, and suddenly felt completely like myself again. But that is not what happened. My confidence came back quietly, one small decision at a time, one promise kept, one brave step, and then another. I used to think confidence meant walking into a room without fear, speaking without hesitation, knowing exactly what I was doing. But now I'm beginning to understand that confidence can look very different. Sometimes it is saying, I don't know exactly how this will turn out, but I am willing to try. And sometimes it is simply trusting yourself enough to take the next step, even when you cannot see the entire path ahead. That is what I want to talk about with you today. Not becoming fearless, not pretending everything is fine, but slowly learning how to believe in yourself again. And maybe realizing that the woman you have been trying so hard to get back to is already beginning to return. When I think about losing my confidence, I realize, it did not happen all in one dramatic moment. I did not wake up one morning and suddenly decide that I no longer believed in myself. It happened slowly. So slowly, in fact, that I did not recognize it at first. It showed up in the way I began second guessing even the smallest decisions. Things I once would have done without thinking suddenly felt complicated. I questioned what I said, what I wore, how I looked, whether I was making the right choice, whether I could trust my own emotions, and sometimes whether I could trust my own mind. I would make a decision and then immediately wonder whether it was the wrong one. I would think about doing something, but before I could even begin, fear would start listing all the reasons I probably should not. What if I fail? What if I embarrass myself? What if people judge me? What if I am not capable of doing this anymore? And then little by little, I began pulling away from the outside world. I stopped answering my phone. I would see it ringing and feel as though I did not have the energy, or sometimes even the words to talk to anyone. So I let it ring. Then I stopped returning calls, and eventually I had cut myself off from almost everyone. I also stopped wanting to leave home. Somewhere inside me, I believed that if people looked at me, they would be able to see that something was very wrong, even though no one knew what was going on and what I was going through except Jason. But I felt exposed. I worried that people would see it in my face, in the way I carried myself, in the way I spoke, as though the pain I was trying so hard to hide had somehow become visible to everyone around me. So staying home felt safer. At home, I did not have to explain how I was feeling. I did not have to pretend that I was okay. And I did not have to worry about someone noticing that I was not myself. But the more I pulled away, the smaller my world became. Leaving the house felt harder. Talking to people felt harder. Trying something new felt impossible. Even allowing myself to be seen felt frightening. And every time I avoided something because I was afraid, it seemed to confirm the belief that maybe I really could not do it. That is a difficult thing about losing confidence. Fear convinces you to stay still, and then staying still convinces you that fear was right. I also spent so much time comparing myself to the woman I used to be. The woman who had more energy, the woman who answered the phone, the woman who could leave the house without wondering whether everyone could see something was wrong. The woman who could walk into a room without rehearsing every single possible conversation in her head. The woman who could take care of everyone else and still somehow keep going. I kept looking backward and asking, why can't I be her anymore? But that question never made me feel stronger. It only made me feel as though the woman I was today was somehow disappointing. And she was not disappointing. She was exhausted. She was confused. She was hurting. She was trying to survive something she did not yet understand. Looking back now, I wish I had spoken to myself with more kindness. I wish I had said, "You are not failing. You are going through something," because there is a difference. Once I began understanding that difference, I realized something else. Maybe I did not need to force myself to become exactly who I used to be. Maybe rebuilding confidence was not about returning to an older version of myself. Maybe it was about learning to trust the woman I was becoming. A woman who had been through difficult things. A woman who was still standing. A woman who was beginning to understand herself in a deeper way. And a woman who little by little was becoming willing to try again. One of the first signs that something was changing in me was that I began feeling curious again. I started wondering, what would happen if I tried? Not what if I fail, but what if I try? That may sound like a small change, but for me it was huge because curiosity gave me just enough room to move. It did not demand that I feel completely confident. It did not require me to know exactly what I was doing. It only asked me to take one small step and see what happened next. And that is where rebuilding my confidence truly began. Not with certainty, not with fear disappearing, but with the willingness to try, even while part of me was still afraid. Once that curiosity returned, I started paying attention to the small things that made me feel alive again. Not completely healed, not suddenly fearless, but interested. Interested in learning, interested in creating, interested in seeing whether there might still be something ahead of me that I had not discovered yet. And that is where this podcast began. The idea of Midlife with Melissa did not come from a place of having everything figured out. It came from the exact opposite. It came from feeling lost and wondering whether there were other women quietly asking the same question I was asking. Where did I go? Why do I feel so different? Is it too late to begin again? And what happens now? At first, the idea of starting a podcast felt much bigger than me. I had never done anything like this before. I did not know how to record an episode. I did not know how to edit audio. I did not know what kind of microphone I needed, how to add music, or how to upload a finished recording. There were so many things I did not know that it would have been so easy to tell myself, "You are not ready for this." And part of me did say that. But another part of me, the part that was beginning to wake up again, said, "Maybe you can learn." And that sentence became very important to me because maybe I can learn. I did not have to know everything on the first day. I only had to learn the next thing. So I began asking questions. I started learning how to use recording software. I practiced speaking into a microphone. I listened to my own voice when hearing myself made me feel so uncomfortable. And I made mistakes. I got confused. And there were many moments when the technology frustrated me so badly that I wondered whether I was capable of doing any of it. But instead of walking away, I kept coming back. And every time I figured out one small thing, something inside me grew a little stronger. The first time I successfully recorded my voice, I felt it. The first time I exported an audio file, I felt it. The first time I listened to an episode and thought, I actually did this, I felt it. Those moments may have looked small from the outside, but to me they were proof. Proof that I could still learn. Proof that I could still create. Proof that I was capable of following something through, even when it felt unfamiliar. And every time I sat down in front of the microphone, I was keeping a promise to myself. A promise that my voice mattered. A promise that my story had value. A promise that I was not going to remain hidden forever. I think that is when I began understanding that confidence is not always a feeling that arrives before we act. Sometimes confidence is created by the action itself. We take one step while we are still uncertain. Then we look back and realize, I did something I did not think I could do. That becomes evidence, and evidence is powerful. Because fear can tell you all day long that you are incapable. But once you have proof that you tried, learned, and kept going, fear does not have quite as much authority as it did before. Starting this podcast did not instantly erase every insecurity I had. There were still days when I doubted myself, days when I worried what people might think, days when I questioned whether anyone would listen or whether I had anything meaningful to even say. But each time I showed up anyway, and I began trusting myself a little more. I did not wait until I felt completely confident. I began while I was still rebuilding. And maybe that is one of the greatest lessons this journey has taught me. You do not have to be fully healed to begin creating something meaningful. You do not have to know every step before taking the first one. And you do not have to feel fearless before doing something brave. Sometimes you simply have to believe there is still enough of you left to begin. And then one small promise at a time, you discover that there was far more of you there than you realized. As I began gaining confidence through this podcast, I also began looking back at the woman who had withdrawn with different eyes. When I look back now, I can see something I could not see while I was in the middle of it. I had not grown cold to the world. I had gone inward because I was scared of the unknown. I did not understand what was happening to my mind, my emotions, or my body. I did not know how long it would last. I did not know whether I would ever feel like myself again. And when you do not understand what is happening inside you, the outside world can begin to feel so overwhelming. I had withdrawn from the world, and for a long time, I judged myself for that. I told myself I had become distant, unmotivated, disconnected, maybe even uncaring. But that was not the truth. The truth was that I was afraid. I was trying to protect myself from a world that felt way too loud, too demanding, and too uncertain. I was not rejecting life. I was trying to survive a season that I did not understand. Realizing that changed the way I looked at the woman I had been. And instead of criticizing her, I began feeling compassion for her. She was not weak. She was overwhelmed. She was not lazy. She was exhausted. She never stopped caring. She was scared. And she needed someone to remind her that being afraid did not mean she was broken. For so long, I thought getting better meant becoming exactly who I had been before all of this began. But now I understand that I do not have to go backward to find myself. I can honor the woman I was. I can have compassion for the woman who went inward. And I can love the woman I am becoming now. Because when I look at myself today, I see someone who is showing up for herself again. Even a month ago, I do not think I fully understood how much was changing inside of me. Now I can feel it. I am keeping commitments to myself. I am using my voice. I am learning things I once believed were beyond me. I am allowing myself to be seen, and I am beginning to enjoy who I am again. I can say something today that for a long time I did not believe I would ever be able to say. I love who I am again. Not because everything is perfect, not because every fear has disappeared, and not because I have returned to the exact woman I used to be. I love who I am because I understand myself more deeply now. I know what it took for me to survive. I know how much courage it has taken to begin again. And I know that every time I show up for myself, I am rebuilding something that I stopped believing that I deserved. My own trust, my own care, my own love. Maybe that is one of the important parts of rebuilding confidence. Learning to stop abandoning yourself when life becomes difficult. Learning to stay beside yourself, to speak kindly to yourself, to keep choosing yourself even when you are still unsure. Jason stayed beside me when I could not find my way back, and I will always be grateful for that. But eventually, I also had to learn how to stay beside myself. I had to stop speaking to myself as though I were the problem. I had to stop punishing myself for the ways I had coped. And I had to begin saying, I understand why you went inward. I understand why you were afraid. But you do not have to hide forever. Little by little, I began opening the door again. Not all at once, not without fear, but enough to let some light back in. And every time I answered the phone, learned something new, shared my voice, or followed through on a promise, I was telling myself, I am here, I am trying, and I am not leaving myself behind again. That is what showing up for yourself can look like. It is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is simply deciding that the woman inside you is worth coming back for. One of the things I did not expect when I started this podcast was how emotional this process would be. I have had to record parts of the first 2 episodes over and over again because I would begin crying and I could not stop. Sometimes I would make it through most of a page and then reach one sentence that brought everything back. The fear, the loneliness, the woman I was when I felt trapped inside a life I no longer understood. And suddenly, I was not simply reading words into a microphone. I was remembering, I was feeling it all again. There were moments when I wondered whether I was strong enough to keep recording. But after I gave myself time to breathe, I would sit back down and try again. Not because I wanted the recording to sound perfect, but because this podcast means so much to me. I have put so many hours into writing, recording, learning, editing, and starting over. And somehow, even with all the work and all the tears, it makes me feel so good. It gives me something meaningful to pour myself into. It gives me something to look forward to. And every time I finish an episode, I feel proud. Not only because I created something, but because I showed up for myself again. I started this podcast because I hoped my story might help another woman. I kept thinking about the woman who may be sitting alone wondering what is wrong with her. The woman who has stopped answering her phone. The woman who is afraid to leave home. The woman who believes everyone can see that something is wrong, even though she has not told anyone what she is going through. The woman who has become so used to the darkness that she has forgotten what hope feels like. If my voice can reach even one woman in that place and help her understand that she does not have to remain there alone, then every hour I have spent on this podcast will be worth it. Every difficult take, every tear, every time I had to stop, collect myself, and begin again. But recently, Jason helped me understand something else. I was telling him how happy I was the podcast was already helping other people. And he said, it's also helping you. And he was right. This podcast has helped me in more ways than I ever expected. It has given me structure when my days once felt empty. It has given me a reason to keep learning. It has challenged me to use my voice again. It has encouraged me to be seen instead of hiding. And it has reminded me that I still have something meaningful to give. Every time I sit down in front of this microphone, I feel more connected to the woman I am becoming. I started telling my story because I wanted other women to feel less alone. But somewhere along the way, telling my story began helping me heal too. Maybe that is what purpose sometimes does. It reaches outward and inward at the same time. It gives something to the person listening, but it also gives something back to the person who was brave enough to speak. It reminds someone else that hope is possible. And while you are saying those words to her, you begin believing them for yourself too. Each episode became another piece of evidence that I was capable, that my voice still mattered, and that I could trust myself to keep going. I used to believe I had to completely be healed before I could help anyone else. But now I understand that I can be honest and still learning. I can say, I do not have every answer. I still have emotional days. I am still finding my way. But I can also say, there is hope. I am moving forward, and you can too. I do not want any woman listening to believe that I am responsible for saving her. I cannot replace a doctor, a counselor, or the support of someone who can be there in the moments when the darkness feels dangerous. But I can tell the truth. I can remind her that she is not the only one. I can encourage her to let someone in. And I can be one more voice saying, please do not give up on yourself. Because sometimes hearing that from someone who has been there can create the smallest opening, just enough light to help you believe that maybe there is still a way forward. And every time this podcast helps someone else see the light, it helps me see it more clearly too. Maybe rebuilding confidence is not only about believing that you can do something. Maybe it is also about realizing that what you have lived through can still become something meaningful, something honest, something healing, something that reminds you that your life and your voice still matter. For months, I did not even want to hear the sound of my own voice. I avoided recordings. I avoided videos. Sometimes I avoided speaking more than I had to. Hearing myself felt uncomfortable because I no longer felt connected to the woman behind that voice. So when I decided to begin a podcast, sitting in front of a microphone was not a small thing for me. It was frightening. The first few times I listened to myself, I wanted to turn it off. I noticed every pause, every mistake, every moment when my emotions came through. But I kept listening. I kept recording. And somewhere between the difficult takes, the tears, and the moments when I almost gave up, something changed. I found my voice. Not the voice I thought sounded perfect, my real voice. The voice that had lived through fear. The voice that had been quiet for too long. The voice that still had something meaningful to say. And I am so grateful that I found it. Now, the voice I once avoided is helping me find my way back to myself. That truth still amazes me. Because rebuilding confidence did not begin when I suddenly felt fearless. It began when I decided to try while I was still afraid. It began when I stopped asking myself to have everything figured out. It began when I made one small promise to myself and I kept it. Then another and another. Every time I sat down at this microphone, I was telling myself, your voice matters. Your story matters. You are still capable of learning, and you are worth showing up for. Maybe you have been waiting for confidence to return before you take the next step. Maybe you have been telling yourself, I will do it when I feel ready. I will begin when I am less afraid. I will try again when I feel more like myself. But friend, what I am learning is that sometimes we do not find ourselves and then begin. Sometimes beginning is how we find ourselves. Sometimes the confidence comes after we take the step, after we answer the phone, after we make the appointment, after we leave the house, after we speak, even though our voice shakes, after we try something new and realize we are still capable of learning. So today, I want to ask you one question. What is one small promise you can make yourself? Not 10 promises, not a complete reinvention of yourself and your life, just one. Maybe your promise is to return a phone call. Maybe it is to walk outside for 5 minutes, maybe pick up something you used to love. Maybe it is to finally tell someone how you have been really feeling. Maybe it is to rest without criticizing yourself for needing it. Or maybe it is simply to look at yourself with compassion and say, I understand why you went inward. I understand why you were afraid. But I am ready to begin showing up for you again. Confidence is not built by demanding perfection from yourself. It is built by becoming someone you know you can depend on, someone who stays, someone who speaks kindly, someone who does not abandon their own self when life becomes difficult. For a long time, I thought I needed to become the woman I used to be. But now I do not want to go backward. I am grateful for who she was. I have so much compassion for the woman who became afraid. but I also love the woman I am becoming now. A woman who has been through the darkness and can recognize the light. A woman who is learning to use her voice. A woman who is still emotional, still growing, and still figuring things out, but who is no longer willing to disappear from her own life. I pray often. I give thanks often. I thank God for carrying me through the days when I could not see what was ahead. I thank Him for Jason, who stayed beside me. I thank Him for every small sign of hope. And I give thanks for this podcast, for this microphone, and for every woman who chooses to listen. And for the voice I once did not want to hear. The voice I am now so grateful I found. If you are still trying to find your own voice, please do not give up on her. She may be quieter than she used to be. She may sound uncertain at first. She may need time, but she is still there. And every time you keep one promise to yourself, you are telling her that it is safe to come forward again. Maybe confidence does not return with a loud announcement. Maybe it returns quietly, in a decision, in a phone call, in a prayer, in a first step. In the moment you look at yourself and realize, I am showing up for me again. And friend, that is something worth being proud of. Next week, we are going to talk about the invisible weight of midlife, the emotional labor, grief, changing roles, expectations, and private struggles that women carry while appearing perfectly fine to everyone around them. Because sometimes the heaviest things we carry are the things no one else can see. Until then, choose one small promise. Keep it gently. Let it become evidence that you can trust yourself again. Take a deep breath. Be proud of every step you have taken. Keep choosing hope. And remember, I've been saving you a seat.